Hey friends, tonight I'm sharing an unlikely crime syndicate that stitched together an empire of fraud. The great Muppet money laundering story of 2007. How a puppet empire nearly got away with it all. A syndicate so bizarre, it nearly pulled off the boldest laundering scheme in television history. A tale of felt fronts, offshore accounts, and a frog who learned the hard way. It's not easy being green, especially in federal court. If slow burn crime stories help you unwind, like the video and subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments when and where you're listening from. Now settle in, and let Detective Jason Ratham, me, walk you through the softest takedown in Muppet financial history. Chapter 1. The Puppet Laundromat. My name is Detective Jason Ratham, and this is the story that almost broke me. Not from violence, not from danger, but from sheer, unrelenting weirdness. You ever tried to interrogate a felt puppet while it's pretending to be asleep? Yeah. Try explaining that in a court affidavit. It all started with a bank transfer, one that shouldn't have existed, from a Chuck E. Cheese in Reno to a shell company registered to a mailbox inside a Swedish meatball truck. At first, the Bureau thought it was a prank, something out of the Department of Puppet Affairs spam folder. But then came the pattern. The breadcrumbs weren't just metaphorical. They were sesame, literal sesame, sprinkled on wire fraud and garnished with embezzlement. And at the heart of it all, the Muppets. Yeah, the Muppets. You know the ones you grew up with, singing songs, teaching morals, flailing their arms during musical numbers like tax-exempt tornadoes of joy. Turns out, behind those googly eyes and catchy jingles was an operation so sophisticated, so disturbingly well organized, it made the Gambino family look like summer camp. But before we get to the offshore accounts and velvet extortion, let me take you back to where it began. A Tuesday, rainy, of course. I was in my office, chewing on a pencil stub and trying to ignore my inbox, when a courier dropped off a box. No return address, just a sticker that said, Waka Waka Confidential. Inside, a VHS tape, labeled in permanent marker, Evidence. I dusted off the old player, because apparently crime doesn't believe in modern formats, and hit play, static. Then an empty laundromat, fluorescent lights flickering. No humans, just a frog in a trench coat, feeding duffel bags into commercial washers, stuffed to the zipper with unmarked cash, one after another, as if laundering money was literally laundering money. Then, a voice, low and unmistakable. Not easy being clean. Click. Tape ends. And so begins the weirdest file I've ever opened. The Bureau brought me in because they needed someone unshakable, someone who didn't flinch at absurdity, someone who once solved the talking cabbage counterfeit case without blinking. That someone was me. They handed me the file. It was thick, too thick for puppets. Inside, surveillance photos of rats in tuxedos entering luxury banks. An offshore bank account in Miss Piggy's name, linked to 17 international credit cards. Shipping manifests for £400 of felt-based novelty merchandise routed through Panama. And a napkin smeared with lipstick. Reading, Kermit knows, but he won't squeal. This wasn't just fraud. It was fraud with flair. They assigned me a team, technically. But as always, I worked alone. Just me. And a whiteboard slowly descending into madness. There were 6 prime suspects, 6 files, each more ridiculous than the last. Let me break them down. First, Kermit the Frog, the boss, calm, collected, croaky. But behind the banjo and those soulful stares, an international network of laundering fronts disguised as community theatre. 5 shell companies in Malta, a frog-shaped yacht called the Pond, and a suspicious amount of green. Second, Miss Piggy, starlet, icon tax evasion queen. She ran a fashion line that sold one dress over and over through a dozen fake boutiques. It was couture with capital gains. Third, Fozzie Bear, alleged getaway driver. He masked cash pickups as failed stand-up gigs, bombing on purpose to justify cash-only shows. His catchphrase, Waka Waka, which turns out is also the activation phrase for a Cayman Islands bank account. Fourth, the Swedish chef, frontman for a culinary smuggling ring. His meatballs were stuffed with bearer bonds and Bitcoin wallets. Every recipe ended in financial ruin for someone. Fifth, Dr. Bunsen, Honeydew, and Beaker, the lab guys. Tech fraud, crypto coin minting, and a failed NFT line called FeltCoin. Beaker testified in vowel sounds. It held up in court. Sixth, Animal, the muscle. He didn't speak much, but his drum solos, used as coded messages across encrypted frequencies. I cracked one. It said, "Meet behind Statlers." That was the gang, each with their own racket, each with enough charm to make a grand jury question their own reality. My job, bring them in, without waking the children. It was late that night, raining again. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, watching felt shadows slide between lampposts. And I thought, what kind of world lets a puppet syndicate grow this big? Where were the regulators, the parents, the puppeteers? But I already knew the answer. They never saw it coming. No one ever suspects the Muppets, and that's where it began. With a whisper, a tape, and a frog in a trench coat saying, "Not easy being clean." But Kermit was just the beginning. The deeper we dug, the fuzzier things got. And next on the list, a bear with a mic, a punchline with a paper trail, and a comedy routine that doubled as a cover. Chapter 2, Waka Waka Wire Transfers. You ever hear a joke so bad it made your bank account nervous? Because that's what happened the first time I tailed Fozzie Bear. 1 minute, he was bombing on stage with a routine about elbow macaroni and foreclosures. The next, he was ducking into a dry cleaners in Queens with 2 briefcases, a sock puppet accountant, and a wink that spelled tax evasion in 5 languages. This wasn't amateur hour. This was laundering, with punchlines. Fozzie had always been the goofy one, the lovable, hat-wearing sidekick with no sense of timing, and a rubber chicken in his holster. But lately, the Bureau had noticed something weird. Comedy club profits didn't match ticket sales, and the only laugh track was tied to bank transfers between Waka Productions and a Panamanian shell company called Haha Holdings. I'd followed the paper trail to a suspicious open mic night in Hell's Kitchen. The crowd was thin. 3 retirees, a parrot, and a man who might have been asleep since 1987. Fozzie took the stage wearing a checkered tie and the grin of someone hiding 12 years of creative bookkeeping. "Hey folks," he said, "what do you get when you cross a bear with a Cayman Islands trust fund?" Silence. He leaned into the mic. "Me, Waka." No one laughed, but someone in the back scribbled something into a little black book, and that someone was me. Behind his awful delivery was a pattern, coded jokes, bank account numbers disguised as knock-knock punchlines. He'd built an entire network of club owners, fake talent scouts, and puppet intermediaries. He claimed to be a joke smuggler, but I knew better. He was a finance magician, laundering 6 figures in stand-up gig cash through fake charities with names like Giggles for Goats and Laugh Aid International. At one point, he ran a foundation to bring humor to underserved volcanoes. Turns out, the volcano was a defunct offshore account in Iceland. I started digging, and I didn't like what I found. There were Venmo payments from Bunsen Honeydew labeled research. There were wire transfers signed by Statler and Waldorf tax advisors. There was even a shady recording of Fozzie saying, "If you laugh hard enough, nobody audits." He was bold, he was fuzzy, and he was 2 jokes away from a federal indictment. The worst part? He had an alibi. Every time I questioned him, he hit me with a gag so corny it short-circuited my badge. "Detective," he once said, holding up a rubber fish, "I plead the guilt." My pen snapped in half. Out of rage. Or disbelief. Maybe both. Eventually, I got approval for a sting operation. We wired the club. We bugged the mic stand. We even replaced the bathroom soap with truth serum. It didn't matter. Fozzie was too slick. He bombed on purpose. Because a failed show meant less scrutiny. And backstage, the real action unfolded. That's where I saw it. Stacks of joke books hollowed out to hide flash drives. USB sticks labeled Waka West and Bear Market Diversification Plan. And a black binder titled How to Cook the Books Without Burning the Audience. This wasn't just about bad jokes. This was criminal theater. The next night, I cornered him outside the club. Rain fell like guilt. His bowler hat drooped. He looked at me, eyes wide. I was just trying to make people laugh, he said. You laundered $2 million through joke royalties, I replied. He blinked. Knock knock, he offered weakly. No, I said. Who's there? Fozzie. Fozzie who? Fozzie Bear, under arrest. But here's the twist. He didn't flip. He just kept telling jokes. Even during processing. Even in the van. He told the same routine 3 times on the way to holding. It was like Stockholm Syndrome, but with banana peel sound effects. Eventually, he was indicted. But during sentencing, the judge laughed so hard he gave him house arrest. As long as he stayed away from comedy venues, computers, and Kermit. But the damage was done. He'd opened the floodgates. Behind Fozzie was something bigger. A deeper ring of accountants, entertainers, and tax-dodging entertainers pretending to be accountants. The kind of criminals who smile wide and file quarterly. I left the courthouse exhausted, smelled like stale popcorn and broken dreams. But I had a lead. Fozzie's last gig had been funded by someone called the Swine Trust. And the address, Piggy Bank Tower, 5th Avenue. I had a new target, and this one wore pearls. Chapter 3, The FeltCoin Fraud. The first red flag was the promotional video. Beaker in a bow tie, sweating bullets under stage lights, trying to explain blockchain using sock puppets and interpretive jazz hands. Behind him, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew stood like a proud parent and an unlicensed economist, pitching something called FeltCoin, the first emotionally backed cryptocurrency. Emotionally backed. Not gold, not government, not even NFTs of sleepy gorillas wearing hats. Feelings. According to their pitch deck, printed on edible rice paper for eco-conscious consumption, each FeltCoin was backed by 1 unit of raw emotion, mined directly from live studio audiences. They'd even developed a prototype helmet, a colander with wires sticking out of it, duct taped to Beaker's skull. Each time he says me, we capture the sincerity, Bunsen explained to investors at a puppet-run tech conference called ThreadCon 2022. We convert that into blockchain signatures and voila, digital empathy. I almost arrested him on the spot, but I waited because I'd learned the hard way that with Muppets, the truth always unravels in 3 acts and at least 1 musical number. FeltCoin launched quietly, buried under headlines about celebrity NFTs and quantum toaster startups. But it spread fast, too fast. By month 3, they had 20,000 unique users. By month 4, 5 million. By month 5, absolutely no idea what it actually did. Turns out, people weren't buying it for the emotional integrity. They were buying it because FeltCoin had 1 genius feature: no traceable ledger. Each transaction was recorded on something called the Snuffle Chain, a privacy-focused blockchain written entirely in Pig Latin and Morse code, supposedly for accessibility. Translation: a digital paper trail you'd need a Rosetta Stone and a 6-year-old to decode. That's when we noticed the pattern. A sudden spike in high-value transfers moving through offshore wallets, some of them owned by charities like Stitch the Gap, and fluff for justice. Others were tied to puppet-operated think tanks and novelty subscription boxes like Yarn of the Month. Behind every one, FeltCoin, laundry detergent factories with no detergent, therapy centers that only offered finger painting, one non-profit that turned out to be Beaker in a fake mustache, handing out free hugs in exchange for QR codes. At first, the IRS thought it was performance art. Then they noticed the Cayman Islands bank account registered under the name Professor Ticklesworth von Feld. He didn't exist, except on a Muppet Wiki fan page, where he was listed as head of fuzzy assets. That's when they called me. I showed up at the Muppet Labs HQ dressed as an investor, wore a Patagonia vest, carried a tote bag that said "I love disruption," spoke only in buzzwords. The receptionist was a slinky in a bowler hat. I passed the test. Inside, Bunsen greeted me with a handshake that felt like warm tofu and led me into the demo room. Walls lined with fiber optic cables, felt swatches, and motivational posters featuring Beaker in a variety of workplace settings. "Welcome to the future of finance," Bunsen declared, handing me a smoothie made entirely of avocado, optimism, and carrot fuzz. Beaker stood next to a whiteboard, visibly trembling, covered in what appeared to be sweat or glue. Probably both. The pitch began. They walked me through the snuffle chain ledger, projected onto a plush wall using a flashlight and a transparency sheet. The numbers didn't add up, mostly because they weren't numbers. They were feelings. "See here," Bunsen pointed. "This transaction represents joy. This one is mild anxiety, and this one, oh, that's pure schadenfreude." "Interesting," I said, sipping my suspicious smoothie. "Now you may be wondering," he continued, "how do we cash out emotion?" "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what I'm wondering." "Through conversational exchanges," he beamed. "We've partnered with giggle-based economies and bedtime influencers." I nodded slowly, trying not to choke on the nonsense or the smoothie. That's when Beaker dropped his marker, blinked twice, and mouthed the word "help." Back at HQ, I ran their patents. One of them was literally a glue stick with a USB port. Another claimed to detect sarcasm using a Muppet-modified Roomba and a mood ring. But the real smoking gun, a document labeled FeltCoin Exit Strategy, shred me. Step 1, crash market with press leak. Step 2, blame algorithm. Step 3, relocate to sock drawer in neutral country. Classic. We raided the lab that night, found Beaker trying to climb out a second-story window with a backpack full of unregistered USB drives and a single goldfish. Bunsen was mid-podcast recording, explaining how cryptocurrency could be woven into scarves for cozy digital adoption. He tried to claim diplomatic immunity under a fictional Muppet Nation treaty. Didn't fly. We confiscated the helmet, the snuffle chain servers, and 3 industrial crates labeled "Feelings Do Not Shake." Each one was full of shredded Monopoly money and therapy notes, signed XOXO. The fallout was felt, pun intended, across the puppet finance world. FeltCoin collapsed overnight. Investors lost millions. One goat in Montana lost his alpaca farm. And Bunsen, he claimed it was all a misunderstanding. That FeltCoin was just an experiment in emotional liquidity. That Beaker had volunteered to be emotionally mined. That the shredded documents were part of a recycling initiative. Jury didn't buy it, but it didn't matter, because just as the trial began, Bunsen disappeared, vanished. One moment he was on the witness stand. Next, poof, gone. All they found was a puff of lint and a suspiciously clean lab coat. Beaker now runs a support group for crypto trauma victims. They meet every Thursday, serve juice, speak only in consonants. So that was FeltCoin, a currency made of vibes, a market driven by feelings, and a criminal operation sewn together with the softest of felonies. And me, I still have the helmet. It hums when you lie near it, especially about your taxes. Chapter 4. Green isn't just a color. They say follow the money, but what they don't tell you is what to do when the money leads to a frog in a banjo shop with an offshore account in the Cayman Islands and the suspicious habit of humming tax codes in G major. Kermit the Frog. To the public, he was an icon, wholesome, humble, a little anxious. But in the bureau, he was a blinking red question mark, a financial Bermuda Triangle in felt. It started with the theatres. We ran a background check on the Muppet Theatre after discovering its insurance was filed under 6 different names. All shell corporations with addresses tracing back to the same UPS store in Burbank. Each company had one thing in common: a green signature, stylized, confident, almost too polite. And the musicals, they bled money on paper, but every invoice, receipt and performance licensing fee was rounded up, and by up, I mean absurd. One show reported $47,000 spent on sentimental lighting. Another, $19,000 on emotional fog. We knew something was off when an accountant claimed Rainbow Connection royalties were being paid in Bulgarian coins. But what really tipped us off? A grant, a suspicious one, a cultural art subsidy meant for small-town puppet theatres, was funneled through a non-profit named Frogs for Freedom. That non-profit didn't have a staff, just a P.O. box and a single transaction on its books, a $1.2 million creative consulting fee paid directly to K.T. Frog-esque. No lawyer, no credentials, just a rubber stamp and a photo of a frog on a jet ski. So I started digging. We found a trail of wires, tiny, harmless-looking transfers, masked under phrases like banjo tuning and pond maintenance. But all of them ended in offshore accounts with names like Ribbit Holdings and Swamp Thing Lilted. One even funneled through the Cayman branch of a bank called First Amphibian Trust. When I finally confronted Kermit, he was sipping tea. Not metaphorically, literally, chamomile, with a lemon wedge. I told him we had questions. He blinked twice and asked if I wanted honey. Then said, "Jason, the world moves fast. If you don't pivot, you croak." I asked him what the money was for. He glanced out the window at nothing in particular and said, "Freedom. From networks, from studios, from all the humans with contracts and clipboards." Kermit, it turned out, had grown tired of the system. He wanted to own the swamp, the rights, the royalties, even the ribbits. So he built his empire, quietly. He hosted private shows for billionaires in international waters, sold exclusive streaming rights to a Muppet-themed metaverse, and backed an NFT project called Kermitverse, which featured digital frogs selling for $20,000 a pixel. The blockchain was powered by a coin called FeltCoin. Guess who owned all the liquidity pools? The frog wasn't just green. He was green, financially, philosophically, even agriculturally. He had investments in a vertical kale farm in Oslo. But here's the catch. For all his secrecy, Kermit kept meticulous books, ledger entries in haiku, expense reports in song, and one spreadsheet that literally sang when you scrolled. It was during an audit of that spreadsheet that we found it, the whole. A missing $2.3 million. Gone. Vanished. No trace, except a single line item labeled Miss P. I froze. We'd assumed Piggy's empire was her own. But what if she wasn't laundering for herself? What if Kermit was the client? I called it in. The bureau didn't believe me. Said the frog was too beloved. Said the optics would be catastrophic. Said to drop it. So I didn't. Instead, I showed up at the theatre that night. Kermit was on stage, rehearsing a number with the Electric Mayhem. He saw me, didn't stop the music, just nodded. Later, backstage, he handed me a folder. Inside, a map, a contact, and a napkin with the words, "Not all green is good." It was his way of cooperating, or confessing, or just croaking under the pressure. Whatever it was, I had what I needed. The frog had finally leapt, and the next ribbit might just echo in court. Chapter 5. Miss Piggy's Fashion Empire. Some criminals use burner phones. Miss Piggy used Vogue covers. You ever try arresting someone who's on the cover of 5 magazines in the same month? Didn't think so. But that was Piggy. Every inch a star. And every sequin. A receipt waiting to be audited. By the time I caught wind of it, her fashion line, Maison de Porcine, wasn't just turning heads. It was turning revenue reports into interpretive dance routines. It started small. A few scarves here, a feathered cape there. Then came the handbags, the signature fragrance, Oink No. 5, and the boutique in Soho that had more NDAs than mannequins. On paper, it was couture. Off paper, it was crypto, cash, and contraband stitched into the hem of a $4,000 trench coat. I sent an agent undercover, codename Trotter. He lasted 72 hours before being escorted out for asking too many questions about a suspicious rhinestone shipment. The last thing he texted me, "Pretty sure the sewing machine is a money counter in disguise." Then radio silence. Now here's what made Piggy's operation so smart. She used returns. People would buy designer goods with cash, way too much cash, then return them a week later, demanding refunds wired to alternate accounts. Refund laundering. Textbook. If the textbook was written by Coco Chanel and edited by the SEC. I got a tip from a disgruntled intern, calls herself Snouty. Said Piggy once yelled at her for folding a blouse too aggressively. Said the showroom was a facade. Said there was a locked wardrobe in the back office labelled "Do Not Open," unless you're on the board of directors or related to a war criminal. That's when I paid a visit. The storefront was immaculate. Velvet ropes, scent machines pumping out bacon-scented vanilla, and a playlist that alternated between French jazz and veiled threats. The sales associate smiled with all the warmth of a forged signature. "Looking for anything in particular?" "Yeah," I said. "Tax records and a confession." She didn't laugh. I wandered past the mannequins, each one dressed like a suspect. Literally, one of them had a tiny ledger sewn into its lapel. Another held a purse that was buzzing. Not metaphorically, actually buzzing. Probably Bitcoin mining. Then I saw her, Piggy, descending a staircase lined with LED uplighting and the tears of unpaid interns, wearing a gown made entirely of shredded banknotes and ethically ambiguous pearls. She locked eyes with me. "Detective Ratham," she said, like my name tasted expensive. "To what do I owe the inconvenience?" I played it casual. "Just browsing," I said. She offered me tea. It tasted like intimidation. We made small talk. I asked about her latest line. She said, "Laundering's all about fabric, darling." I asked about her books. She said, "We don't read here. We wear our narratives." I tried to stall her while backup got into position. Meanwhile, she offered me a jacket from her Ponziware collection. Said it looked good on anyone running from the truth. Then came the slip-up. She handed me a garment bag, but the weight was off. Too heavy for silk, too stiff for cotton. I opened it. Inside, a gold-plated ledger, a thumb drive, and a tiny note that read, "If found, please destroy before indictment." She froze. I froze. The background music hiccuped. Then she laughed. A full, throaty, Oscar-worthy performance. "Oh, detective," she purred. "You really think you've uncovered something? That I'm some villain in heels and contour?" "You're wearing money as a belt," I said. She didn't deny it. Just then, an explosion of glitter from the back room. A decoy. While my agent stormed the boutique, Piggy slipped out a side door. Security footage later revealed she exited wearing a different outfit, a fake mustache, and riding what appeared to be a scooter shaped like a Fabergé egg. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about greed. This was about image. She wasn't just laundering money, she was laundering reputation, turning shady into chic, filing federal charges under the category of avant-garde disruption. Later, we traced funds from her label to offshore shell companies, Hog Couture Incorporated, Lard Assets Unlimited, and one that simply read Piggy Bank LLC, based in the Cayman Islands. We raided her warehouse, found a runway made of tax receipts, sewing needles filled with ink cartridges, and one mannequin wearing a t-shirt that said, "I acquired my lawyer on Rodeo Drive." We never found Piggy that night, but we froze her accounts, shut down the boutique, and left behind one sign in the window, closed due to creative differences with federal law. Still, her influence lingered. Red carpets, reality shows, cryptic Instagram posts tagged in neutral territories. And somewhere out there, she's still designing, still scheming, still pairing tool with tax fraud. But me, I was one step closer, because behind the sequins and sass, there was a pattern, and it was all starting to stitch together. Chapter 6. The Swedish Front. Some kitchens cook meatballs. This one cooked numbers. Let me be clear. The Swedish chef didn't speak English. Not fluently anyway. Most of his dialogue sounded like a blender having an existential crisis. But somehow, every bank statement tied to this guy made perfect sense to someone. And that someone had offshore accounts in at least 7 time zones. The Front, a popular street food truck parked at random spots across New York. Name, Burke Bonds. Subtle, not even a little. Profitable. You bet your spatula it was. I first noticed the truck outside the courthouse, selling meatball subs, with a side of wire transfers. A tip from one of our internal auditors flagged a series of transactions all labeled Swedish Sarsage Consulting, spelled exactly like that. The funds, filtered through shell corporations, washed via pork vendors, and reinvested in culinary futures in the Balkans. It was a financial stew of gibberish and genius. I approached the truck in plain clothes, ordered the Meatball Mondo special. He gave me a receipt that came out in triplicate, with a QR code that led to a Lithuanian investment firm's fantasy football league. That's when I knew this wasn't just sloppy accounting. This was art. "Burke, Burke?" he asked, handing me a sandwich wrapped in something that suspiciously resembled a shareholder's report. I nodded, pretended to take a bite. It was delicious, suspiciously so. Then I looked closer at the sources. Red, white, and green squiggles drawn on the paper in carefully measured lines. DNA level precision. I scanned the pattern and fed it through our bureau's pattern decoder. It wasn't garnish. It was routing numbers. This guy was piping Swiss bank account info onto mustard packets. He was seasoning crimes. We traced his supply chain. The meatball truck got deliveries twice a week, but it wasn't food. not all of it. One crate, delivered by a puppet wearing a trench coat, contained a thermal printer, a Wi-Fi hotspot, and a backup hard drive labeled Gravy Ledger Do Not Stir. Chef never signed invoices. He stamped them with a spatula inked in gravy. And somehow, that counted as legally binding in 3 countries. I sent Agent Kowalski in undercover as a line cook. He lasted 4 shifts before suffering what we described as linguistic burnout. Said he tried to ask about salt levels and ended up being assigned to encrypting invoices using parsley sprigs. It wasn't just laundering anymore. It was culinary encryption. Then we noticed the truck's location schedule followed a pattern. Every Wednesday at 2 p.m., it parked near the stock exchange. Every Friday at midnight, outside a comedy club owned by Statler and Waldorf. And Sundays, right outside City Hall, serving bribe balls with a wink. We couldn't make an arrest yet, no hard evidence. So we ran surveillance, hours of footage, dozens of meatball orders, each with a side of financial mischief. Finally, a break. A customer, disguised as a food blogger, accidentally spilled a dipping sauce onto their tablet. The sauce formed the shape of a banking logo, the one linked to Kermit's Cayman accounts. The next morning, we raided the food truck. No chef, no meatballs, just a note taped to the grill. Burke, bye. He was gone, but he left behind the ledger, or rather, a cookbook, the International Cookbook of Illicit Capital, by the Swede. Inside were recipes like Shell Company Soufflé, Bearer Bond Bisque, offshore omelettes. Each page included an ingredient list and routing details. We took it to the bureau. It cracked 6 laundering loops wide open. Turns out, the Swedish chef wasn't running the kitchen. He was the menu, a coded system of financial movements, moving faster than any server could deliver. Food truck today, and tomorrow, a noodle stand in Prague. But this chapter wasn't about cuisine. It was about mobility, about how a puppet with no clear language could teach a masterclass in financial mobility. So I filed the report. Chef, Swedish, dangerous, fluent in gravy. Still, I'll admit something. That sandwich, it was damn good. And somewhere, out there, maybe Oslo, maybe Omaha, he's still flipping meatballs, still stirring secrets, still basting his crime in garlic butter and plausible deniability. But we'd flipped his recipe, and we were finally starting to get a taste of just how deep this Muppet syndicate went. Chapter 7, Animals Drum Code. Some people use ciphers, others use burner phones. But Animal, he used a double bass pedal and a hi-hat. By now, I'd stopped being surprised. This case had already walked me through a laundromat money loop, stand-up gig scams, felt-based crypto, a pork-scented fortress, and a meatball truck hiding bond transfers. So when I found out that encrypted communications were being embedded inside drum solos, well, that was just a Tuesday. It started with a tip, An audio engineer at Statler's bar called me. Said he'd been reviewing footage from a Muppet jam session. The house band, Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, had been recording live for something called Garage Grooves Volume 6. But the engineer claimed that one of Animal's solos didn't line up. Not musically, mathematically. There's a pattern, he said. I ran the BPM shifts through a spectral analyzer. Every change matches a character on an ASCII table. I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like probable cause, so I listened. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The first few beats were chaos, classic Animal. But then, syncopation, a tight, repeating cadence that lined up like Morse code dressed in tie-dye. I brought in a rhythm analyst from Quantico. She confirmed it. Each solo had time signature shifts that, when decoded, spelled out things like meet behind Statler's, delivery 10 p.m. And the particularly ominous, tell the chef the onions are synthetic. Statler's was more than just a bar. It was a front. Again. Located behind a crumbling vaudeville theatre, Statler's wasn't even listed on Yelp. You only got in by knocking a 3-2-5 rhythm that matched the opening bars of Mahna Mana. Inside was all dusty velvet booths and whiskey-stained monologues. And at the back, just past a curtain that hadn't been cleaned since the Nixon era, was a green room. Literally, painted green, and full of plants. That's where I found Animal. He was sitting on a stool, chewing a drumstick, not the chicken kind. Sweat band on, eyebrows twitching like he was buffering. Animal drum, he shouted when he saw me. Yeah, I said. I got that from the hair gel and calluses. I sat down, tried to ease in. You like Morse code? I asked casually. Beep beep bop, he replied, which, according to my decoder, loosely translated to "You'll never crack the vault unless you decode the funk." I showed him the waveform printouts, the ones we'd analyzed. He sniffed them, then licked one, then looked at me dead in the eyes and whispered, "Too much treble." That's when Dr. Teeth walked in. Slick shades, grin like a crocodile at a jazz festival. He saw the tension and nodded. "Don't mind Animal," he said. "He speaks fluent, percussive paranoia." "We've been monitoring the drums," I said. "They're not just beats, they're messages." Teeth grinned wider. Every band's got a secret language. Ours just happens to trigger wire transfers. He offered me a seat, poured something purple into a cup. I declined. "We're not criminals, detective," he said. "We're artists. We don't cook books, we remix them." I asked about the drop points, the encrypted messages, the fact that Animal's last set led to a warehouse filled with shredded tax documents and inflatable ducks stuffed with bearer bonds. Dr. Teeth didn't blink. "We don't control what people do with our sound," he said. "Some folks use music for love. Others use it for offshore shell corporations. It's all interpretation." "Do you know what a RICO charge is?" I asked. Teeth nodded slowly. Sounds like a Latin percussionist. Used to open for Santana. I sighed, looked back at Animal, who was now drumming on a ficus with 2 spoons. The deeper I got, the more surreal it became. Back at HQ, I reviewed every Electric Mayhem performance for the last 2 years. Each solo contained messages, and not just directions, financial instructions. Transfer to Swiss Squeaky Bank. Gonzo ETA, 1400 hours. Piggy prefers vanilla folders. We traced a signal to a recording studio in New Jersey, raided it, found a vault. Inside, a single metronome, taped to it, keep time, or else. That was the thing with Animal. He was unpredictable, but only on the surface. Beneath the noise was order, strategy. Like a jazz hacker with a felony record, I finally cracked it during a solo he did for a late-night show. 3 minutes in, the hi-hat opened with a rhythm that, when matched to the NATO phonetic alphabet, spelled out a bank routing number. It belonged to a Cayman Islands account under the name Furioso Holdings. We got the warrant, froze the funds, triggered a cascade of Muppet account collapses across 7 jurisdictions. And Animal, he went on tour, claimed the drum codes were performance art, said he was exploring beat-based data encryption as emotional release. The DA tried to press charges, but the jury couldn't stop headbanging. In the end, he walked. Well, he moshed. But the damage was done. His solos had connected the dots, led us from the music scene to money laundering, from symbols to syndicates. As for me, I can't listen to jazz anymore. Every snare hit sounds like a subpoena. And sometimes, late at night, I hear a faint rhythm tapping from a fire escape across the street. I don't answer it. I just drum back, 3 taps, then silence. Because some codes, once cracked, can't be uncracked. And some beats, they never stop. Not in this line of work. Not with this case. Not with Animal on the loose. Chapter 8. The Statler and Waldorf shell game. You ever get heckled by a suspect mid-investigation? Because I have. Twice. By the same 2 guys. From a balcony. At a funeral. But let's back up. The Muppet Syndicate had a lot of moving parts. Chefs laundering bonds. Pigs laundering couture. Drummers encoding drops in triplets. But the financial nerve center, that was tucked away behind mahogany desks, inside a dusty column at the Muppet Times, and managed by 2 retired vaudeville critics who smelled like mothballs and tax fraud. Statler and Waldorf. To the public, they were just grumpy old men, with more punchlines than dental implants. Always in the balcony, always complaining, always wearing the same tan blazers like they were born at a Sears sale in 1973. But behind the sarcasm, a shell game so complex it made Enron look like amateur hour at the Chuckle Hut. Let me explain. You see, these 2 weren't just throwing shade from the mezzanine. They were hiding shade, offshore, through a network of fake publishing accounts, falsified pension funds, and what I can only describe as satirical laundering. Here's how it worked. Every week, Statler and Waldorf would publish a new review in the Muppet Times financial column. These pieces looked like rambling criticisms of Muppet acts. But if you decoded the first letter of each paragraph, they spelled wire instructions. An article titled Fozzie's Fiasco, a Joke in 12 Steps, actually routed $400,000 through a Moldovan shell company named Heckle Fund LLC. Their opera review, Sing Swine Sing, a ledger for a Hong Kong real estate purchase disguised as a pop-up pork bun kiosk. They ran fake businesses out of fake addresses, a snow cone stand in the Arctic, a sleep study in Guam. One company sold pre-owned harmonicas exclusively to gerbils. And people bought it, literally, because if there's one thing grumpy men are good at, it's paperwork. I first got wind of it when one of their reviews was flagged by a financial crimes AI developed by Beaker. Accidentally, of course, he was trying to order soup. The pattern was obvious once you knew what to look for. Each review included a pun so bad it triggered emotional distress, a location reference matching known shell addresses, and a complaint about lighting, which turned out to be code for asset transfer status. I brought the file to my captain. He blinked. "You're saying the old hecklers are laundering money through theatre reviews?" "Not just laundering," I said. "They're ironically laundering. It's meta-crime." He sighed. "I miss when crimes had guns." To dig deeper, I had to go undercover. So I bought a blazer. Tan, tweed, smelled like old popcorn and existential regret. I posed as an intern at the Muppet Times. My alias? Jason Ratham, because I was bad at aliases. Statler took to me immediately. "Hey, this one's got less charisma than my kidney stone." Waldorf cackled. "Yeah, but the stone had better hair." They were relentless, but behind the zingers was a brilliant system of distraction. While they roasted the world from their dusty office perch, they quietly manipulated markets, shorting puppet-based stocks, inflating valuations on novelty wig companies, running seminars called How to Retire Bitter and Rich. The office itself was full of clues. A bust of Groucho Marx with a hollow interior and burner phones. A file cabinet labelled spleens that was just full of offshore bank records. And a framed photo of them shaking hands with the CEO of FeltCoin, now serving time in a foam-lined cell. I installed a bug in a potted plant, listened in. They were planning something big. Waldorf. Transfer the assets from Piggy's truffle vault into the Waldorf fund. Statler. Already did. Coded it into the limerick we sent to the Times editor. Waldorf. "Huh, that guy thinks it's satire." Statler. "It is satire. The IRS has no sense of humor." Waldorf. "Good, neither do we." I needed hard proof, so I followed them. Turns out, every Thursday at 2 p.m., they left the office for what they called their bitterment meeting. I tailed them to a bingo hall in Queens. or so I thought, because beneath that bingo hall was a literal underground bank, accessed via a trapdoor in the G column. Inside, felt-lined safety deposit boxes, retired puppets acting as security, and a ticker tape that read NASDAQ PUPPET up. They were moving money from Muppet front businesses, cycling it through joke shops, and reinvesting it into satirical stocks, literally stocks that only exist as jokes, like Boingcoin, Wiggle, and Breadflix. It was genius. It was ridiculous. It was working. And I had them. I confronted them in their office, kicked open the door, flashed the badge, sunglasses still on. Statler. Oh great, an action hero with cataracts. Waldorf. Hope he brought a warrant and a thesaurus. I held up their latest review. Animals Solo, a crime against ears and ethics. I read the first letter of each paragraph aloud. WIRETRANSFER. They froze. Statler. Well, you can't arrest us for having opinions. Waldorf. Yeah, it's America. We're allowed to hate jazz. Sure, I said. But you're not allowed to move $2.3 million through a salsa bar in Tijuana using fake Yelp reviews. Waldorf raised an eyebrow. Depends who you ask. I cuffed them both. Statler turned to Waldorf. Told you we should have used haikus. They're in a minimum security facility now, still heckling. Their cellmate, a mime. Last I heard, they published a zine called Rant Quarterly, which is somehow trading at $48 a share. Their empire fell, but their wit, still criminal. And me, I kept the blazer. Sometimes justice does wear tan. Chapter 9. The Great Gonzo Drop. You ever tried tracking a chicken through international airspace? No? Then you've never worked a Gonzo case. Because when it came to the weird, the warped, and the gravitationally questionable, Gonzo the Great was more than a stunt performer. He was a logistics nightmare, and possibly an unregistered airline. He called them acts. But every time he strapped himself to a rocket, cannon, or helium balloon bouquet, something went missing. Jewelry, microchips, a suspicious number of Fabergé eggs. At first, no one saw the pattern. Because who's gonna look at a guy wearing purple tuxedos and ask, was that emerald necklace in your shoe? But I did, because one Tuesday in June, I was on surveillance, and I watched Gonzo shoot himself out of a cannon labeled Operation Cluckstorm and land in the middle of a luxury wedding in Monaco. He stood up, bowed, handed the bride a bouquet of sunflowers, then disappeared into the marina with her father's watch. The crowd thought it was part of the show, so did the bride. But I saw the glint in his eye, the one that says, I know something you don't, and also, I might be concussed. The deeper I dug, the weirder it got. He had passports in 6 countries under names like Feather V and the mysterious Moldavian. He'd done stunts in Dubai, Bucharest, and on top of the Louvre. And every time, something valuable vanished. A coin collection. A set of prototype sunglasses. One time, the mayor of Copenhagen's monocle. Interpol flagged him. The FAA flagged him. The circus community tried, but he hypnotized them with a kazoo solo. So I had to act. I followed the trail to an abandoned airstrip outside Branson, Missouri, where Gonzo was rehearsing a new routine. A high-altitude triple flip dive off a modified drone, while juggling rubber chickens and landing inside a kiddie pool full of spaghetti. You know. Article. But what I saw was more than a death wish. It was a money drop. Because tucked in one of those chickens, a USB drive, one that contained offshore transfer logs, fake Muppet passports, and a PDF menu from Swine and Dine with all the criminal codes baked into the appetizers. I confronted him. He was upside down in a harness, sipping espresso through a bendy straw. "Detective," he said, beaming, "I was just thinking about you. Also, gravity." I flashed my badge. He flashed a smile, and I said, "You've got 10 seconds to tell me what you've been dropping." He shrugged. "Sometimes cash, sometimes love letters. Once, a raccoon named Charlie, but mostly hope." He was slippery, not just metaphorically. He was literally coated in glitter and sunscreen. But I pushed. I laid out the photos, the flight logs, the string map, the one that connected him to the chicken syndicate out of Brussels. His face changed. "Oh no," he whispered. "They told me it was performance art." "Who told you?" "The voices in my trailer," he said. "Also Camilla." "Ah, yes. Camilla. His chicken companion. Loyal, feathered. Possibly trained in covert surveillance. She strutted in then, pecked a pattern on the floor that looked suspiciously like Morse code, and dropped a microfilm reel at my feet. I didn't know what to make of it. Was Gonzo a mastermind? A patsy? A pawn in a feathered empire? Turns out, yes, to all three. Because the next day, I decoded that reel. It showed aerial footage of every drop he'd done over the past year. And where the art landed, smuggling rings blossomed. Fake passports in Prague, rare stamps in Serbia, and in one case, a crate of stolen Beanie Babies parachuted into a collector convention in Florida. He wasn't just part of the operation. He was the air division. The Muppet syndicate had used him to transport high-value items across borders, disguised as performances. No customs, no inspections, just applause and plausible deniability. So I made the call. I got clearance to intercept his next stunt, an extreme interpretive dance skydive over Niagara Falls. Our agents were in position. The drop zone was marked. The net was ready. He leapt, twisted, sang a bit of Prince, and landed square in our arms, shouting, "Ta-da!" We clapped. He bowed. And we arrested him for 7 counts of aerial contraband distribution. Back at HQ, he gave us everything. Flight plans, code words, even his favorite brand of glitter, French of course. In return, he asked for one thing: to perform at his own trial. And you know what? The judge approved it, because when Gonzo entered that courtroom, wearing a cape made of subpoenas and a monocle made from a bottle cap, something changed. The jury laughed, the prosecutor applauded, and I just shook my head. Because this was Gonzo, the chaos in the system, the loophole with feathers, and maybe, just maybe, the strangest informant I'd ever worked with. But one thing was clear: the drops were done, the skies were quiet, and justice, well, it was still weird. Chapter 10. Cracked felt and broken strings. It started with a tug. One string on the board, red and frayed, connecting Gonzo's cannon stunt to a bakery in Belarus. I didn't even mean to pull it, but that's the thing about webs. You don't know which thread collapses the whole nest of spiders until it's already in your lap. By now, HQ looked like a yarn store exploded. The evidence board had grown from one cork rectangle to a full wall-to-wall installation. Photos, receipts, feathers, a half-eaten eclair, and a flattened kazoo. Every suspect, every deal, every laundering front. It was beautiful in the way a nervous breakdown is beautiful. Chaotic, colourful, and only held together by tape, tacks, and the unblinking gaze of a detective on decaf. I stood back and stared at it all, tried to make sense of the nonsense. My jaw cracked, my neck popped. I hadn't slept in 2 days, and I could hear colours. Somewhere behind me, the coffee maker wheezed like an asthmatic goat. "Connect the felt," I muttered. "Pull the strings." At the centre of it all, a single invoice, one that had shown up in 3 different accounts: Statler's, Piggy's, and Gonzo's. It was for a puppet repair shop in Reno. Suspiciously expensive, especially for a place that specialized in emergency seam reinforcement and eyeball realignment. So I paid them a visit. The place was tucked behind a bowling alley and a vape store called Vapor and Vice. Outside, quiet. Inside, chaos. Felt scraps on the floor. Thread spools as tall as toddlers. And at the front counter, a hunched figure with magnifying goggles and a name tag that read, "Louis, Seam Surgeon." "You here for a patch-up or a stitch down?" he asked without looking up. "Neither," I said, flashing my badge. "I'm here for the truth." Louis didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just slid a thimble over his pinky like it was brass knuckles. "You want the truth? That costs extra." I paid in cookie coupons. He accepted. What he gave me was better than truth. It was the blueprint. Louis had been fixing up puppets for years, but lately the clients were different, more secretive, more bruised, more unzipped. They'd come in with burn marks, ink stains, Velcro trauma, he said. Said it was wear and tear. But I've patched enough suspects to know these weren't playroom injuries. These were crimes in cloth form. One puppet came in reeking of lasagna and gasoline. Another had a zipper sewn into its foot with microfilm hidden inside. And one One had a message stitched into its underarm, coded in Morse via button placement. Louis took photos of everything, had a scrapbook labeled Stitches and Snitches. I flipped through it. Page 11 had Rizzo the rat with an extra tail. Page 14 showed Beaker with seams full of shredded tax forms. Page 18 was just a feather and the word Krark scrawled in red Sharpie. I thanked Louis, bought a spool of midnight blue thread for no reason, and headed back. The board at HQ shifted. New strings, new faces, new panic. I started pinning names together faster than a production intern during Muppet pilot season. The whole thing began to resemble a haunted doily. Kermit's offshore accounts, linked to Gonzo's chicken courier drops. Fozzie's joke receipts, matched invoices for cryptic gigs at Swedish chefs' truck stops. Miss Piggy's fashion line, tied, literally, to a bolt of fabric Louis had flagged as criminally sparkly. And Statler and Waldorf, they weren't just hecklers. They were ghost investors in over 17 fake hedge funds, all housed under a holding company named Bitter and Associates. It was all there, every thread, every crumb. And then, snap. The board collapsed, literally. Too many tacks, too much yarn, too many felonies. The whole wall came down like a curtain at the end of a very guilty Broadway show. I sat in the mess, covered in pushpins and puppet glitter. Coffee cup balanced on a crime scene photo of Bunsen, holding a graph labeled Evasion Trajectory. I was close, so close, but missing one piece. And that's when the message came in. Typed. Anonymous. Short. Check the piano. The piano in the break room. Used once a year for sad birthday sing-alongs and worse Christmas carols. I sprinted, lifted the lid. Inside, a folder. Inside that, everything. Bank transfers, shipping manifests, a napkin sketch of Gonzo's vault trapdoor pulley system labeled not for crime. It was the entire network, mapped, linked, signed, sealed, all wrapped up like a Muppet-shaped Christmas present from the IRS. Back in the interrogation room, I laid it all out. To no one. Just me, the files, and a rubber ducky someone had stuck in the evidence tray. I looked at it. It squeaked. It knew. So did I. The syndicate had cracked. The empire was fraying. The strings had snapped. And it was time to raid the wardrobe. But not loud, not hard. Software quiet, whispered. Because this wasn't your typical crime ring. This was Felt. And Felt deserved finesse. Chapter 11. The Whispered Raid. You don't need a battering ram when you've got bedtime clearance. They say the quietest missions make the loudest noise afterward. And this one? It was practically a lullaby with a warrant. I called it Operation Thread Count. Why? Because we were about to pull the strings, gently. And when we did, the whole felt-lined empire was going to come apart like a poorly stitched sock puppet. The Bureau issued the green light just after dusk. No sirens. No shouting, just a coordinated network of sleepy agents, white noise machines, and slippers with reinforced soles. We started with animal. You don't raid a drummer with hyperactive tendencies at full volume. So we sent in a jazz therapist disguised as a roadie, played a soft snare roll, and before Animal could shout drum, he was snoring in a beanbag, hugging a metronome. Next was Beaker. Poor guy didn't even need a warrant. We just left a trail of test tubes leading to an aromatherapy diffuser. 10 seconds of lavender mist, and one whispered, "Meep," and he was out cold. We found crypto wallets in his lab coat and a sticky note labeled FeltCoin 2.0, do not launch. The Swedish chef was trickier. His kitchen was booby-trapped with boiling fondue and suspiciously explosive lingonberries. But we had a plan. One agent rolled in disguised as a meatball. He got halfway to the walk-in fridge before the chef shouted, "Burk, burk, boom," and launched a rolling pin. It missed. Chef slipped on his own gravy. Case closed. Piggy's takedown was more of a photo shoot than an arrest. She demanded 3 outfit changes, her Miranda rights in French, and a press release calling her a misunderstood philanthropist. We agreed to everything, just to get her out of the vault room. Turns out, she was already packing. Her designer luggage contained $3.2 million, a tiara made of bearer bonds, and a one-way ticket to not your jurisdiction. Statler and Waldorf. We didn't even try to arrest them. They turned themselves in, walked into HQ, sat on the bench, and started roasting the arresting officer's haircut. We confiscated their critique columns, which turned out to be coded investment scams. They smirked, said, "Well, it was a shell game anyway." Fozzie, he cracked the moment we asked him for a punchline. Tried to bribe us with a knock-knock joke and a duffel bag of unmarked ones. It was sad and weirdly heartfelt. He offered me a banana and said, "For potassium and forgiveness." I took the banana. He took the deal. The last to go was Kermit. We didn't storm in, didn't bust the door. We knocked, softly. He answered in a robe, eyes tired, tea in hand. "I knew you'd come," he said. He didn't resist, didn't cry, just handed me a ledger with "It started with a rainbow" scribbled on the cover. The ride to HQ was silent. I sat across from him, watching his reflection in the cruiser window. Even in handcuffs, he looked composed, heavy, like a frog who'd carried the weight of too many dreams. We processed them all by dawn. Fingerprints, mugshots, the works. But it didn't feel like a victory. There were no cheers, no champagne. Just a room full of soft suspects and the faint smell of glue and glitter. I filed the last report at 6:03 a.m. Stamped the case, closed-ish. Because deep down, I knew something. The felt never really disappears. It just hides in plain sight, waiting, planning, hugging your childhood with one hand and siphoning funds with the other. This was the whisper before the storm, the kind that rustles a curtain. and reminds you, even the softest toys leave the sharpest trails. Chapter 12. The Trial of the Century. They called it the Trial of the Century, but really, it was more like a matinee. 2 juice boxes, 1 unpaid parking ticket, and a mistrial over glitter allergies. Still, justice had a show to put on, and I had front row seats, right behind a sock puppet bailiff who squeaked when he walked. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, interns, half the cast of Fraggle Rock. Outside, fans held signs like "Free the Felt" and "Honk if you love habeas corpus." Inside, the prosecution prepped like it was Broadway. The defense, a circus, literally. Beaker took the stand first, swore in on a manual of lab safety protocols, said "meep" 37 times. The translator assigned gave up by the 5th, but the court stenographer somehow understood. Typed like she was coding for NASA. Apparently Beaker was confessing. Sort of. He admitted he had created the FeltCoin algorithm. Also accidentally fused his hand to a slinky. Unrelated, but still disturbing. Then came Fozzie Bear, defending himself. In a tie 2 sizes too big, carrying a briefcase full of rubber chickens and legal pads covered in banana stickers. He started his defense with, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Waka Waka, Your Honor, your furship. Permission to pun." The judge, an aging badger with bifocals and a background in bird law, sighed. "Granted, for now." Fozzie launched into a 10-minute argument full of bear puns and crypto confusion. "Your Honor, I may be fuzzy, but I'm not fuzzy on the facts. And this whole trial is a bearish market on justice." The jury winced. The prosecutor wept. The stenographer filed for hazard pay. Miss Piggy arrived late, wearing courtroom couture that sparkled like a bribe. She refused to sit with the others, claimed the lighting was emotionally combative. Testified while reclining on a fainting couch brought in from evidence lockup. When asked if she knew about the laundering ring, she scoffed. "Moi, launder. I don't even separate my colors." Then she blew a kiss at Kermit. He ducked. The courtroom gasped. Someone fainted. Probably the bailiff again. Kermit took the stand last, wearing a blazer 2 decades out of style and a look that said, "I'm tired." He didn't deny it. Not anymore. "Yeah," he croaked. "I signed some forms. Let the money pass through some lily pads." "Figuratively or literally?" asked the prosecutor. "Both," said Kermit. "And why?" Kermit looked at the jury, then at Miss Piggy, then at me. To keep the family afloat, to buy Fozzie stand-up rooms, to fund the science lab, to give Animal a drum set he couldn't chew through. He exhaled. "I did it for them." The courtroom went quiet. Even the gallery of penguins in tuxedos stopped honking. Emotion, real or manipulated, filled the air, like someone had spliced pathos into the soundtrack. The prosecutor leaned forward. "And would you do it again?" Kermit hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, but this time I'd keep the receipts. The jury deliberated for 12 hours, 11 of which were spent trying to understand Dr. Bunson's financial flowcharts, one of which accidentally launched a smoke bomb. The verdict: guilty on counts of wire fraud, crypto conspiracy, and obstructing legal nap times. But thanks to a legal technicality involving fictional species classification, none of it stuck. The judge issued sentences that read like plot points in a holiday special. Beaker, community service teaching fire safety with sock puppets. Fozzie, weekly stand-up shows at a retirement home, no puns allowed. Piggy, fashion line restricted to court-approved fabrics. Kermit, probation, therapy, and 12 months of public service hosting budget-friendly telethons. They walked out together. Not free exactly, but uncaged. Back into the world with felt less polished, but heart strangely intact. I stood on the steps outside, watching them vanish into a cab shaped like a banana. A penguin was driving. Of course, the press asked for a quote. I gave them the only one that mattered. Justice is never neat, especially when it's hand-stitched. Then I pulled my coat tighter, headed home, and let the city exhale. The case was closed, but the puppets, they'd go on.